Our next speaker is Marc Bellemare, Dr. Marc Bellemare with the University of Minnesota, and he is going to present on the law and economics of agricultural data privacy. And Marc, you have 15 minutes from now is 8:58, and I'll give you a five-minute and a 1-minute warning.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you for having me speak on this topic. This will be a 30,000-foot view of the law and economics of agricultural data privacy. This is not something that I work on normally. One of the organizers, Phil Pardee, who's one of my colleagues at the University of Minnesota, asked me, I forget when it was that Phil asked me, it seems like everything pre-COVID was years and years ago, but he asked me whether I'd be interested in thinking about agricultural data privacy. Phil has been working in the area of big agricultural data for a few years now, and so I thought, sure, why not? Because I have this friend whom I've been meaning to work with for years and years. I've known Charlotte for probably 17 years now, since we were both graduate students a long time ago, and she's a lawyer, I'm an economist, and we kind of constantly think back and forth, well, what can we work on together? And this kind of seemed like it was the ideal thing to work on. So my co-author, Charlotte Chider, is starting at Loyola University Chicago School of Law this summer, and I am Northrop Professor in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota. I'm also one of the 4 co-editors of the American Journal of Agricultural Economics. But this is a brand new area for me. You guys are much closer to the actual ground when it comes to these issues. So, given the breadth of the workshop's topic, privacy and ownership, we decided that we should probably focus on one thing and just kind of go with the former. And my co-author is an expert in cybersecurity, and she's been doing a lot of work on privacy as it relates to the healthcare system and health data. And so this was kind of a natural segue for her to just kind of go work into a different area, namely agriculture. So how do law and economics scholars define privacy? Well, so we went back to the source and we consulted kind of the earliest writings about privacy, and the earliest writings about that in law and economics are by Richard Posner, who is kind of a famous judge on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeal and also a professor at Chicago. But he says privacy is used in at least 3 senses. First, to mean concealment of information. Second, it's used to mean peace and quiet, as in, I would like my privacy, stop calling me at home. And then it's used as a synonym for freedom and autonomy. And the meaning of privacy that we're concerned with here is the first one, the concealment of information that we would rather not have all out and about. So Posner relates privacy to the economics of information, whose best known representatives are the 2001 Nobel laureates. So you certainly have heard of Joe Stiglitz, who has been writing quite a bit about international finance and international macro, and a lot of popular writings, but George Akerlof and Michael Spence also kind of shared that Nobel Prize with Stiglitz. And the economics of information is broadly concerned with situations, with transactions where there's asymmetric information, meaning either adverse selection, hidden types, so you don't know what kind of person you're dealing with, so there's some hidden information there, or you don't know what kind of good you're dealing with, there's some quality differentiation and the buyer's not seeing it, or moral hazard, where there's some hidden action. You can't observe fully what people are doing, and so there's that's the information asymmetry, or both. So Stiglitz has a really nice QJE article, Quarterly Journal of Economics, where he summarizes what the economics of information is about in 2000. So Posner says the concealment of information involved in privacy is analytically equivalent to the concealment of a type or of an action. So he kind of equates the two. He says privacy reduces efficiency in the marketplace, and yet he has often expected market demand to result in better privacy for consumers. So in other words, like there's kind of this inherent contradiction in what he writes, and he twists himself into a pretzel when he says, well, privacy is inefficient, by arguing that the common law surrounding privacy is itself efficient. So it's worth quoting his argument in full. And if you're not familiar with kind of Posner's career, his entire career has been articulated around the one claim that he's made, this big, bold claim that the common law is efficient, meaning that legal decisions are rendered and laws are written so as to maximize efficiency, reduce transactions costs, and thus kind of maximize society's welfare, which is an empirical claim, and it's a contested claim. But he writes, the tort law prevents the obtaining of personal information by intrusive means, as by eavesdropping. The economic objection to eavesdropping is that its principal effect is not to obtain information, not in the long run at least, but to reduce the effectiveness of communications. Knowing that people are overhearing my conversations, I will speak less frankly. The cost of communicating will be higher. Anyone familiar with the practical consequences of allowing student observers in faculty meetings will confirm the truth of this observation. And so with this casual empiricism, Posner manages to kind of twist himself back into, oh, this is all, inefficient and stuff. More modern treatments are slightly more in line with reality. And more recently, economic theory has arrived at a more nuanced conclusion. Privacy can both increase and decrease efficiency in the marketplace. And here the reference is writings by Alessandro Acquisti. And I list a couple of those readings at the end. He writes, information, when shared, can become a public good whose analysis can reduce inefficiencies and increase economic welfare. When abused, it can lead to transfer of economic wealth from data subjects to data holders. So in short, information holds tremendous value, and economics can help identify the appropriate balance of individual interest and data use. This is where economists come in, right, to identify the relevant trade-offs. But in this case, the relevant trade-offs are not always obvious, and it's not clear that economic theory has kind of one thing to say about it. It's very context dependent in this context. So Acquisti ultimately concludes that we're unlikely to come up with a unique answer to questions like, what is the optimal amount of privacy for an individual and for society? Ultimately, though, what economics can do is to help identify those relevant trade-offs, as I said. So more interestingly, for our purposes, he identifies 3 markets for privacy, 2 of which apply to agricultural data privacy. So the first type of transaction, I apologize, I just realized I didn't blow up my slides. And so for people to be able to see them in full, here they are. He says the first step of transactions that have privacy relevance occur in the market for ordinary non-privacy goods. So in the process of exchanging or acquiring other products or services, individuals often reveal personal information which may be collected, analyzed, and then used by the counterpart in the transaction in a variety of ways. So we're all familiar with having to install an app on our phone or to install some piece of software on our computer and be presented with this kind of very, very long kind of statement that says, well, if you don't agree to this, you cannot install our app, you can't use it, right? So that's one of those cases. The second type of privacy-related transactions occur in what may be called the market for personal data. This market in itself includes a variety of exchanges. One form of exchange involves infomediaries that trade consumer data among themselves or with other data holding firms. So here, perhaps the best example is credit bureaus, right? Credit information collecting agencies are this type of infomediaries. They accumulate this data about your credit score, your credit worthiness, and then they sell it to subscribers who, for instance, I'm refinancing these days, and so I've had to deal with credit inquiries and so on. So it seems to us that the most relevant markets for big data in agriculture are the first. So the former here, right, the first type of transactions about when you give up information in the process of doing something else. So in the process of exchanging or acquiring other products or services, individuals often reveal personal information. This is relevant to several aspects of agriculture, namely, among others, if you apply for credit or insurance as an agricultural producer, this is the example that I just gave, right? You have to give up some financial information, some that you might prefer to keep secret. And then there's the whole Internet of Things, right? Where if you have a self-driving cultivator, you might be kind of sending information to a satellite or to some firm that is kind of like holding the hardware or the software, the firmware behind what you are operating. And then there's a market for data, which includes a variety of exchanges, like these infomediaries, also directly relevant to some of the things we'll talk about today. So the GEMS platform, among others, is one of those infomediaries, and it holds a lot of data. And then there are other agricultural data platforms. So for instance, if you think about the arms data that the USDA holds for research, that is one of those data platforms where it's held private, and you have to kind of run run your estimation procedures on a dedicated terminal because this is directly identifiable, right? You can say, oh, well, I know who has this farm of like this many hectares in this county. There aren't two farms that have this many hectares. So there's the reason why this remains private. So what are the relevant trade-offs? Well, in economics, a trade-off is usually expressed in terms of opportunity cost or the value of the next best foregone alternative. So if you're familiar with Greg Mankiw, he has probably one of the most famous textbooks in all of economics. One of the 10 principles of economics that he lists is the cost of something is what you have to give up to get it, right? What is the next best alternative? And even economists kind of get confused with this notion. There's famous stories about how two economists asked a bunch of professional economists to identify the opportunity cost of something during the American Economics Association meetings, and I think a quarter of economists could identify what the right opportunity cost was. That's neither here nor there for today. There's this theoretical construct that is the opportunity cost. More broadly, the relevant trade-offs involved in ag data privacy will have to carefully consider all of the relevant costs and benefits. And here, I mean both private and social costs and benefits. It's not just what does it cost me to give up that information, but there might be some social implications to me giving up information, because if we can aggregate over all that information and derive some kind of guiding principle for something that's going to make society better off, then there's a social benefit right there, right, of marginal changes in privacy. So what economists are concerned with is mainly small changes, right, or changes at the margin, and not kind of like big kind of changes where you go from nothing to everything, or you go from nothing to something really large. We want to know what happens if we make decisions at the margin, not for the average, in other words. So trade-off calculation works most effectively when individuals understand how their data might be used and can choose whether to use a technology, so weigh those costs and benefits. Unfortunately, and this is where my co-author really shines, because she has a paper that I'm listing at the end, notice of data use is often ineffective because of several reasons, but there's the unavailability of alternative desirable options. So we have probably all been faced with that situation where we want to install an app, and then it says, well, we will collect your location data, what have you, right? We want access to your pictures, your microphone. And then we're like, well, I don't really like that, but this is really kind of the only game in town when it comes to this one application, for instance, right? So if you are not using that application, then you might as well, you're going to use a vastly inferior alternative. So for instance, right, the reason why a bunch of people are on the same social media platform is because everybody else is using it. Using anything else just kind of cuts you off from everybody else. Reading fatigue related to the number of privacy notices, right? So my co-author says that to read all that we are presented with in terms of privacy notices every year, on average, it would take 76 days per year, which I thought it would take less than that. I thought it would take more like 7 days, but 76 days a year is insanely long. She refers to that as a structural problem. There's also the abstract nature of data use and a difficulty in communicating potential privacy risks, right? What does that mean? People are not, people don't have perfect forward look, or they're not perfectly forward looking. People are not supercomputers. They can't kind of imagine all of the consequences of what might be happening. Because if they were, right, we wouldn't be hearing about all those kind of data breaches and hacks and things like that and all those problems that causes. I think one of the famous examples that comes to my mind is when I think there was a site called, there's a site called Ashley Madison that was geared basically at people who wanted to have an affair. I think that was their slogan, like, life is short, have an affair, ashleymadison.com. And they got data breached, and then the names of people who were on that site and their email addresses were put out in the public sphere on some kind of like dark web data repository. And a lot of relationships ended. And I heard that even some people might have kind of like, killed themselves because of that. So that's the kind of thing where if you could perfectly forecast all those things, you probably wouldn't get into those sites in the first place. Then there's hidden practices where an individual can't assess potential risk, which is related to what I just discussed, and reliance on unchanging models for data use when technology promotes reuse and data use change. So if you're interested in all those things, consult that Chider 2019 article. And we have two examples here. Aaron, how am I doing in terms of time?
So that noise was your 1 minute. So
okay. Thank you. So I will skip those examples. You guys can read them on your own once you have the slides. but here they are. And I just want to kind of leave you guys with a bunch of references right there. Aaron, I didn't hear any noise because you muted yourself, but
Oh, did I forget?
glad that I got a good,
Sorry.
I've got a good inner sense of time, I think. So
You were pretty close.
thank you.
Yep. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So yeah, so I guess we're about ready for questions.
Should I stop sharing, Aaron?
No, you're still sharing.
Should I stop it though?
Oh yeah, you can go ahead and stop. David, do we have any questions yet?
Not a question, but a comment where somebody is digging hearing about the philosophical structuring of the field of economics.
You are most welcome. As I said, this is not an area, privacy is a new area of investigation and research for me. So that is about all I can do at this point, is to offer you kind of this really wide overview.
Let's see. Another comment, this ADT is a great way for farmers not to spend days reading privacy agreements and EULA agreements.
This ADT, what is that?
I don't know, Billy, can you expand on ADT? Oh, Ag Data Transparent.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So ADT is called Ag Data Transparent. It was founded several years ago, really with an impetus from American Farm Bureau and all the grower groups. In fact, all the associations are part of the group. I serve on the board of directors, and it's a way for us to have 10 questions that a vendor would answer that helps really synthesize who owns the data, how it's used, is it portable, all those sorts of things that I'm a farmer, so all those sorts of things that we're concerned about. So I think that's one way. We've got to find ways to make this more concise for farmers. So when I heard Mark say 77 hours or 77 days, I didn't disagree. I mean, there's no way for me to read all these things. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you guys.
Thank you, Billy, for your comment. I think there's a great deal of value in having that kind of aggregator, right? Someone who kind of says, look, if you get, and a bunch of tech articles do that online, but they will kind of offer, like they say, well, the top 10 apps for weight loss or something like that. And they might say, well, if you agree to use this one app, this is what you're agreeing to. And I think this kind of synthesizing or aggregating of what you are giving up, what you're getting into with your data has huge value in terms of increasing efficiency.
Are there any data sharing policies or best practices for instantiating some of the more theoretical constructs that you've shared?
So that is I hate to play the blame the co-author game. As I said, this is a new area for me. My co-author would be the person to ask, and I would encourage you guys to get in touch with her after the workshop is over.
And could you tell us your co-author there?
Yeah, Charlotte Chider. She is going to be at the Loyola Chicago School of Law, and she's starting this summer. I know that she's leaving the University of Nebraska right now to move to Loyola. If you send me an email, I can put you in touch with her, because I don't know what her email address is going to be. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the end of our questions right now, Aaron.
Well, we have time for one more if anybody wants to jump in real quick.
Question here, why not have overarching laws to oversee ag data issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is related to the point that I made kind of early on, where I said, you know, economic theory and thus probably legal theory, right, can only get you so far in terms of thinking very, very broadly about privacy, about data privacy. And it's really kind of a case-by-case thing. And you can't kind of legislate too generally, because then, you know, it becomes very, very, then everything kind of falls under this general law, and then it becomes very litigious. So I think it has to be case-by-case by definition of the fact that we're dealing with eminently complex and unique situations. You know, health data is not the same as ag data, is not the same as financial data, and so on and so forth. I mean, ideally, that's what you would want, right? You would want very general kind of lawmaking, but I don't think that's possible in this particular case.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for having me.